unnecessary. Third issue I wanted to talk about. I haven't seen a lot of this, talked about, but the creepy porn lawyer, as Tucker Carlson calls him, Michael Avenatti. For those of you who don't know, he's representing Stormy Daniels, who is the porn star that Trump supposedly slept with, and now there's allegations that Trump violated campaign finance reforms, pay her off, etc., etc. I'm not even really going to get into that today. That's something I'll be looking at more in depth and having probably just a video on it alone. But anyways, Avenatti now is coming out, and he put a little video out that showed what he says is he has a client, who is a immigrant, maybe gay. I think maybe he said a gay immigrant. And he was at a country club, and the video just shows Tucker Carlson basically saying, "Get the F out of here," and then someone in Tucker's crew kind of like grabs the guy, and there's a bunch of yelling going on. You can't really tell what's happening. Avenatti claims that this was Tucker and his family assaulting this guy who was just minding his own business sitting at a bar. He claims right before the video started, Tucker yelled, "Go back where you came from," implying that Tucker knew this guy. I'm guessing implying that because the guy didn't look white, that Tucker assumed he was an illegal immigrant or something and told him to get out of there. And that's Avenatti's story. Now, this story doesn't make sense on face value. You would have to assume, why would a public figure go out of his way to just some guy sitting on a bench doing nothing and just go up and say, "Hey, I'm just going to start harassing this guy for no reason"? Like, there had to be something that occurred to trigger this reaction, right? Unless Tucker and his family are just insane, which doesn't seem likely. So now I'll give you Tucker's version of what happened. Now, I'm not saying Tucker's version is 100% true, but at least it seems more plausible than this guy was sitting there doing nothing, minding his own business, and Tucker and his family decided to come up and harass the guy. It just doesn't make sense. So Tucker's version is he has a 19-year-old daughter. They're at this country club, and she gets up to use the restroom. And she comes back, and this guy stops her and's like, "Hey, are you sitting at the table with Tucker Carlson?" And she's like, "Yeah, he's my dad." And he calls her an effing C word, right? And she's basically in tears and comes back to the table, and Tucker says he's pretty fired up. So him and his son go up to the guy, and they're like, "Did you just say this?" And the guy gets belligerent with him and starts yelling and like basically calls her that name again. And Tucker's son throws red wine in the guy's face, and the back and forths are had, and then around this time is when the video would have started, and Tucker's basically yelling, "Get the F out of here," and there's kind of a crowd of people around, and that was kind of the end of it. And Tucker's statement goes on to say, like, basically, it took all he had not to physically assault the guy, which I 100% agree with Tucker. If a young girl in my family, if someone said that to her, I would probably, it would take a lot to not do something crazy. Yeah, red wine, right? Probably left a terrible stain. What a terrible thing. So, but yeah, so that's the story. Now, my takeaway of this, and this happened, by the way, October 10th, right? So my takeaway of this is, like, one, it shows that Tucker was already being harassed before this Antifa incident. Just a quick rundown in case you missed that. I kind of talked about that more in my last live stream, but what happened was this Antifa organization showed up outside of Tucker's house while Tucker was working. Tucker's wife and kids were in the home. She ended up having to hide in a pantry because they were trying to break the door in and were chanting veiled threats saying that they shouldn't be allowed to sleep and no borders, no walls, no USA at all, and they would feel as scared as illegals in the caravan felt, etc. So this shows that Tucker's been targeted before, as I think a lot of right-wing people are. You're starting to see it more and more. So, yeah, that was the first takeaway I had from it. The second is, like, it just shows how petty Avenatti is. The fact that he took this case, right, and is pushing it is no doubt because Tucker picks on him all the time, right, calls him a creepy porn lawyer, and made a fool of him when Avenatti came on the show, right? So this is clearly just Avenatti trying to get back at Tucker. And again, Avenatti has zero credibility whatsoever, and his story doesn't even make sense. Now, if you remember, during the whole Kavanaugh situation, Kavanaugh was the Supreme Court justice, or was nominated to be a Supreme Court justice. And for those, in case you didn't follow politics for like 2 or 3 weeks, he was the Democrat sent in this rape allegation or sexual assault allegation, and a couple other women came out, and then Avenatti brings a woman out, and she claims that basically Kavanaugh was in charge of these rape gangs, that she showed up to basically 10 parties and watched girl after girl get raped by Tucker, gang raped by Tucker had nothing to do with that, by Kavanaugh and a bunch of other dudes, right? And so he was running these rape gang parties, Kavanaugh was, and then this woman actually herself was then raped in one of these rape gangs, and yet she still continued to come. The story made no sense whatsoever, and then she starts to get interviewed, and it's clear the more she talks about it, it's like, well, okay, maybe I didn't see this, maybe I didn't see that, and it turns out that it's all ridiculous, right? There was no credibility. Avenatti's problem there, and that woman's name was Sputnik, was that the lie was too great, right? Like, I'm not saying that Christine Blasey Ford, who was the first woman who came up with an allegation of Kavanaugh, I'm not saying she's lying. I certainly don't believe that her story was accurate, whether she intentionally lied or not. But I'm not saying she's intentionally lying. But that story, though, is the kind of story that at least is believable, right? Like, it was within the realm of possibility that something like that could happen. It was kind of like only three people in the room. It was no specific time given, no specific date. There wasn't actual ridiculous amount of physical harm that occurred. So it would be at least in the realm of possibility that this could have gone unreported for a couple decades and then resurfaced in this woman's mind, and now it was a big issue to her, right? Saying that gang rapes were occurring at these high school parties all the time. You watched all these girls get gang raped, right? Never said a word about it. Then yourself was gang raped, then continued to go back to the party. There had to have been hundreds of witnesses with all the men that were participating in these rapes and the women that were actually being assaulted. Plus, there were probably people at these parties that would have just been neither victims nor involved in the assaults. So hundreds of people, not one accusation ever made, not one other person came up. It was clear that the story was garbage, right? Well, so Avenatti's now and his client are now under investigation. Possible criminal charges will be filed against them for making up a story like this and lying. So, fast forward to this situation then. Again, Avenatti's making up too great of a lie. He's a terrible liar, right? You don't lie and say, oh, no, the guy in that video that I'm representing now, he was just sitting at the bar doing nothing, watching sports on TV, and then all of a sudden Tucker Carlson comes up and's like, you need to get the F out of here, and his son's throwing wine on him and things of that nature. That doesn't even pass the smell test. That clearly isn't what happened. He would have been further ahead to at least admit some of the wrongdoing that this guy did. He got in an argument with Tucker and his family because he doesn't like his politics, but then Tucker and his family escalated it beyond what it should have needed. That would at least be a believable story. But Avenatti can't help himself, right? He's such a terrible liar and he's so petty, it's clear that he's not to be taken seriously. And so he comes out with this story. So it's an absolute joke. And then the worst part is he's making these grotesque exaggerations and lies. Again, I'm not saying that there couldn't be some point that Tucker and his family went too far, but the way Avenatti's spinning it is so ridiculous. That's clearly not what happened. He does this coming off the heels of Tucker being targeted by Antifa. The police are now looking at Antifa, the ones that tried to break into Tucker's house and things, as a possible hate crime. And to my what's the word I'm looking for? I was actually impressed with the fact that even most media people were like, yeah, this is too much. What Antifa did to Tucker was too much. So even though I think they're huge hypocrites because they've been defending Antifa, a lot of these people, over and over again, while those of us in the know have been like, look, these are not people to defend. It's going to get out of hand. Someone's going to get hurt. It's going to escalate. And they kept defending them over and over and things of that nature, right? I don't I still think they're hypocrites, but at least maybe they're coming at the obvious. Maybe they're coming around. They realize, geez, this group we've been defending, this was a bridge too far what they did to Tucker. So I thought maybe, okay, eventually they're going to be able to realize they made a mistake and try to distance themselves from this kind of extremism. So it's good that you've seen that in the media and with Democratic politicians and just normal everyday people you talk to that don't like Tucker or that call themselves Democrats. I was very pleased that a lot of them said that they thought what Antifa did was ridiculous in that situation. So for Avenatti then to come on the heels of that and then pile on to Tucker and his family is absurd. It's even worse. It just shows how much of an immoral, crappy person Avenatti is. And again, it would be different if he was telling the truth about what his client did, because then you could be like, well, this is a serious crime charge. And Avenatti comes out and addresses Tucker's statement of what happened in this incident, and he's like, oh, well, then why didn't Tucker tell people immediately what happened on his TV show and things like that? Clearly he's lying. Him and his son assaulted my client who did nothing. Well, that just goes to show, right? Like, and I think that is a credit to Tucker, right? Like, he's not going out there, I think, really seeking victimhood points. I think if this incident happened to Jim Acosta or anyone at CNN or MSNBC, they would have immediately gone on air the next day and said, look what this Trump supporter did. This is because Trump's rhetoric. Now my family's being endangered. My daughter was called names, etc., etc. Tucker, to his credit, didn't come out and say, look what the Democratic rhetoric's doing. He just kept it to himself, right? He was just like, whatever. The country club supposedly did an internal investigation and told the gentleman that supposedly called Tucker's daughter these names that he was no longer welcome back. So they basically sided in favor of Tucker. So it's just another example. Avenatti, like, I'm sure it's not news to anyone watching, but Avenatti's a scumbag. He's broke. He's looking for publicity and money any way he can. And I hope he's in serious legal trouble for what he tried to do to Kavanaugh. That would be very amusing to me. I would think that he deserves to go down for that.